My sister walked into the apartment I managed, tossing a rent increase letter onto my kitchen table, tripling the price from $2.350 to $7.100. My parents. They called it fair, but they didn't know that beneath my fingernails was ink from the signature on documents my grandmother had left me. The entire building was mine, and I'd been preparing for this moment in silence for 3 years. My name is Claire Maddox, and I've spent the last 6 years managing Maple Glen Apartments, a modest but well-maintained building in the heart of Portland. At 34. I wasn't exactly where I thought I'd be in life, but I'd found purpose in keeping the building running smoothly, making sure our elderly residents had working heaters in winter, and that the young families could raise their kids in a safe, clean environment. The morning Sabrina showed up changed everything. I was in my ground floor office, reviewing maintenance requests when I heard the distinctive click of her designer heels on the lobby's worn marble. My older sister had that effect. Her presence announced itself before she even entered a room. Through my office window, I watched her stride past Mrs. Rodriguez and her granddaughter without acknowledgement, her tailored suit as sharp as her ambition. "Claire," she said, not bothering to knock as she entered my office. "We need to talk." Sabrina had always been the golden child. Yale Law, partnership at 32, a brownstone in the nice part of town, me community college, a property management certificate, and a one-bedroom apartment in the building I managed. But I'd never minded the comparison, until today. She placed a manila envelope on my desk with the kind of practiced precision she probably used in courtrooms. "The family had a meeting last weekend, about Maple Glen." "What meeting?" I set down my coffee mug, noting how she said, "the family," as if I wasn't part of it. I wasn't invited to any meeting. It was an investors' discussion. She adjusted her pearl necklace, the one Grandma Edith had given her for law school graduation. "Mom, Dad, myself, and Uncle Richard, we've been reviewing the building's financials." My stomach tightened. "The building's financials are fine. We're at 95% occupancy. Maintenance is up to date." "The market's hot, Claire." She cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. "Properties in this neighborhood are selling for 3 times what they were worth 5 years ago. We're hemorrhaging opportunity cost." I stared at her. "Hemorrhaging opportunity cost. These are people's homes, Sabrina. It's a business asset." She tapped the envelope, "which brings me to why I'm here. Effective next month, we're implementing new rental rates to align with market standards." My hands were steady as I opened the envelope, but my mind was racing. The letter inside was printed on Sabrina's law firm letterhead. Of course it was. My eyes scanned down to the numbers, and I had to read them twice. $7,100. My voice came out strangled. "My rent is going from $2,350 to $7,000. Your below-market rate was a courtesy extended by Grandma Edith." Sabrina's tone was clinical, detached. "But we can't run a business on sentiment. Every unit paying below market rate is money left on the table. This is triple what I'm paying now. Actually, it's 3.02 times your current rate." She smiled, actually smiled. "But don't worry. As family, we're giving you 60 days instead of the standard 30, Dad insisted." I thought of my residents, Ruth Saunders in 3B, who'd lived here for 15 years. The Nguyen family in 2A with their new baby. Old Mr. Petrov, who fed the stray cats behind the building. "What about everyone else? Are you raising their rents too?" "Market rate adjustments across the board." She pulled out her phone, already moving on to her next task. "Those who can afford to stay will stay. Those who can't." She shrugged. "Will be homeless. Will find housing within their means." She looked up from her screen, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, annoyance, disdain. "This is the real world. Claire, Grandma coddled you, letting you play property manager, keeping rents artificially low, but she's been gone 3 years now, and it's time to maximize the asset's potential." Grandma cared about people. Grandma was from a different era. Sabrina stood, smoothing her skirt. The vote was unanimous. "Claire, Mom and Dad agree it's what's best for the family's financial future." The words hit like a physical blow. Mom and Dad voted for this. They understand business. She moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and we'll need you to distribute the notices to all residents by end of week. As property manager, that's still your job. For now. The threat in those last two words wasn't subtle. Sabrina, please, can we talk about this? Maybe a smaller increase? There's nothing to discuss. She turned back, and the smile on her face was the same one she'd worn when she'd beaten me at Monopoly as kids, when she'd gotten into Yale while I was waitressing, when she'd bought her brownstone while I was still renting. It's just business. Claire, don't take it personally. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone with the letter that would destroy everything I'd worked to maintain. I sank into my chair, staring at the numbers that seemed to grow larger the longer I looked at them. $7,100, more than most of my residents made in a month. I thought about calling my parents, but what was the point? They'd chosen their side, voted to support Sabrina's plan without even telling me there was a meeting. The family had decided. And I wasn't really family, I was just the little sister who managed the building, whose below-market rent was a courtesy they could no longer afford to extend. My phone buzzed. A text from Sabrina. Notices need to go out by Friday. Template attached. Don't forget to include yours. That emoji, that damn smiling emoji, summed up everything. This wasn't just business to her. She was enjoying this, enjoying putting me in my place, enjoying the power she held. I looked around my small office at the maintenance schedules I'd carefully organized, the birthday calendar where I tracked every resident's special day, the thank you cards pinned to my bulletin board from families I'd helped over the years. 6 years of my life, building a community, creating a home for people who needed one. And with a single vote I wasn't even invited to participate in. My own family had decided to tear it all down. But as I sat there, something Grandma Edith used to say echoed in my mind. The truth has a way of surfacing. Claire, just like cream in coffee, you can stir all you want, but it always rises to the top. I pulled open my desk drawer, looking for tissues, and my fingers brushed against something I'd forgotten was there, a small key on a faded ribbon. Grandma's safety deposit box key. I'd been meaning to go through her remaining papers, but had never found the time. Maybe now was exactly the right time. Standing up, I pocketed the key and looked once more at the rent increase letter. Sabrina thought she'd won, thought she'd put me in my place once and for all. My parents thought they were making a smart business decision. But Grandma Edith had loved this building, had loved these people. She wouldn't have left things this simple, this cruel. She'd been too smart for that, too careful. And as I locked my office door, heading for the bank, I couldn't shake the feeling that Grandma had one more surprise waiting, one that my family's unanimous vote hadn't accounted for. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. I'd barely made it back from the bank when I heard the soft knock on my apartment door, still reeling from finding Grandma's safety deposit box empty except for a cryptic note. Look closer to home, dear one. I wasn't prepared for visitors. Ruth Saunders stood in my doorway, her 72-year-old frame wrapped in the hand-knitted cardigan she'd worn every day since her husband passed. She held a tea tray with 2 cups and a plate of her famous lemon cookies. You look like you could use some chamomile, dear, she said, not waiting for an invitation before shuffling past me into my living room. Ruth had been Grandma Edith's closest friend, their daily tea ritual as sacred as Sunday church. After Grandma passed, Ruth had tried to include me in the tradition, but I'd always been too busy with building maintenance, too overwhelmed with grief. Today, I didn't have the energy to refuse. I heard about the rent increases, she said, settling into my armchair as if she belonged there. Mrs. Rodriguez is in tears. The Nguyen family is already looking at listings in Gresham. News travels fast. I sank onto my couch, accepting the cup she offered. The chamomile's honeyed scent reminded me painfully of Grandma's kitchen. Your sister made quite an entrance this morning. Ruth's sharp eyes studied me over her teacup. Very professional, very efficient. That's one word for it. I have other words, but Edith raised me better than that. She set down her cup with deliberate precision. Though I must say, this whole business smells fishier than the docks at low tide. It's perfectly legal, I said, the words bitter in my mouth. Property owners can raise rent to market rate. Sabrina made sure to cite all the relevant statutes in her letter. Legal and right aren't the same thing. Ruth leaned forward. Your grandmother knew that. It's why she loved you so much you understood that a building isn't just bricks and mortar, it's the lives inside it. Tears pricked my eyes. Well, apparently the rest of my family disagrees. They voted to maximize the asset's potential. I mimicked Sabrina's clinical tone. Voted? Ruth's eyebrows climbed toward her silver hairline. When was this vote? Last weekend, apparently. A family investors meeting I wasn't invited to. Interesting. She pulled a small notebook from her cardigan pocket, the same kind Grandma used to carry. And who exactly attended this meeting? Sabrina. My parents. Uncle Richard. Why? Ruth made a note, her handwriting still precise despite her age. I worked as a legal secretary for 40 years. Dear, 30 of those at Hartwell and Associates, dealing with property law. She looked up. In my experience, when family members hold secret meetings about inherited property, something's usually rotten. A chill ran down my spine. What are you saying? I'm saying your grandmother was the sharpest woman I knew. She played bridge like a chess master and ran this building like a Swiss watch. Ruth helped herself to a cookie. She also didn't trust your sister as far as she could throw her. Told me so herself, right in this room, 2 weeks before she died. My hand trembled, tea sloshing dangerously close to the cup's rim. She never said anything to me about not trusting Sabrina. She didn't want to burden you. You were already doing so much, keeping this place running while she was sick. Ruth's voice softened. But she was worried. Sabrina had been asking questions about the building's value, about development potential, about zoning laws. Edith didn't like it. But Sabrina barely visited when Grandma was alive. She visited plenty, just not when you were around. Ruth's revelation hit like cold water. Always came during your Tuesday morning supply runs, always left before you got back. My mind raced, trying to process this information. Why didn't you tell me before? What good would it have done? You were grieving, trying to keep everything together. She patted my hand. But now, with this rent business, I think it's time we did some digging. Digging. Your grandmother kept files on everything. Receipts from 1987 tax returns going back decades. She was meticulous. Ruth stood with surprising agility. If something's off about this whole situation, there'll be a paper trail. I thought about the empty safety deposit box, the cryptic note. I've been going through her things, but not in the bank, dear. Here, Ruth tapped her foot on my floor. Edith had a horror of safety deposit boxes after the S&L crisis, kept her important papers close. My heart skipped. Where? That's what we need to figure out. Ruth moved toward my door, then turned back. Start with her apartment. I know Sabrina had it cleaned out. But Edith was clever. She would have hidden anything important where your sister wouldn't think to look. Sabrina had professional estate cleaners go through everything. There's nothing left. Did they check inside the radiator covers behind the electrical panels, under the floorboard in the closet that always creaked? Ruth smiled at my shocked expression. Edith and I shared many secrets over our tea, including where she kept her emergency chocolate stash. After Ruth left, I sat in my apartment, mind spinning. The building felt different now, not just my workplace and home, but a puzzle Grandma had left behind. Look closer to home, her note had said. I grabbed my master keys and headed to the basement storage area. Grandma's unit was in the far corner, supposedly empty after Sabrina's efficient cleaning. The metal door creaked open, revealing bare concrete walls and dusty shelves. But Ruth was right, Grandma had been clever. I started with the obvious places, running my hands along shelf brackets, checking for loose screws or hidden panels. Nothing. Then I remembered something Grandma's obsession with her old Singer sewing machine, the one she'd insisted on keeping in storage despite never using it. Sabrina thought it was junk, I muttered, spotting the machine in the corner, covered by a dusty tarp. The machine itself yielded nothing, but as I moved it, I noticed the floor beneath it sounded different hollow. My pulse quickened as I found the edges of a carefully cut square in the concrete, painted to match perfectly. Inside the hidden compartment was a fireproof box. My hands shook as I opened it, revealing neat folders labeled in Grandma's precise handwriting, bank statements, correspondence, building documents, and one marked simply, "For Claire when the time comes." I opened the correspondence folder first, and my blood ran cold. Email printouts between Sabrina and various developers, dating back 2 years before Grandma's death, discussions about potential redevelopment, maximizing land value, and strategic rent increases to facilitate voluntary vacancy. One email from Sabrina to a company called Apex Development made my stomach turn. "Once we have control, we can clear the building within 6 months. The old tenants won't fight if we make staying uncomfortable enough." But it was the folder marked for me that held the biggest surprise. Inside was a letter in Grandma's handwriting. "My dear Claire, if you're reading this, then Sabrina has shown her hand. I've watched her circle this building like a vulture, and I knew she'd move once I was gone. But you, my dear, have something she doesn't you understand that wealth isn't just about money. It's about community, about home, about taking care of each other. Check with Howard Dade." A phone number was written below, followed by more documents. I didn't understand legal papers with terms like LLC and beneficial ownership and trust structures. I sat back on my heels in the dusty storage room, pieces of a larger picture starting to form. Sabrina's rent increase wasn't just about market rates, it was the first move in a longer game, one she'd been planning for years. But Grandma had been playing a longer game still. I carefully returned everything to the box and took it back to my apartment. Tomorrow, I'd call this Howard Dade. Tonight, I had notices to deliver, but not the ones Sabrina expected. As I drafted a memo to my residents about an emergency building meeting, I thought about Ruth's words, "Legal and right aren't the same thing." Grandma had taught me that too. She'd also taught me that in chess, the best defense was often a carefully planned counterattack. And thanks to her hidden files, I finally had the pieces I needed to play. The morning I was supposed to distribute Sabrina's rent increase notices, I instead found myself sitting in a small cafe in southeast Portland, watching rain streak down the windows. Across from me, Howard Dade looked nothing like the high-powered attorney I'd expected. In his 70s, wearing a well-worn cardigan and nursing a cup of black coffee. He could have been any retiree enjoying a quiet morning. Until he started talking. "Your grandmother was one of the smartest clients I ever had," he said, pulling a thick folder from his briefcase. "Also one of the most suspicious. She came to me 3 years before she passed, convinced your sister was plotting something." 3 years. I set down my untouched latte. "But that's right around when Sabrina started visiting her during your supply runs." Howard's knowing smile reminded me of Grandma's. "Edith noticed. She noticed everything." He opened the folder, revealing documents that made my head spin. "Your grandmother restructured the building's ownership in a very specific way. On paper, the family trust owns Maple Glen Apartments. That's what your sister sees, what she's acting on. But ownership was actually transferred to an LLC called Summit Ivy Holdings 3 years ago. The trust only manages the building, it doesn't own it." He slid a document across the table. "And Summit Ivy Holdings has one sole owner." I stared at the paperwork, my name printed clearly on the ownership documents. "I don't understand. I never signed anything. I would remember." "You did sign. Your grandmother had you sign what you thought were routine management papers. Page 47 of your employment contract update, to be specific." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "Edith was very thorough. Every signature witnessed, every document notarized, every I dotted and T crossed." My mind reeled. "So I've owned this building for 3 years. "Legally, yes. Your grandmother set it up so ownership would be invisible until someone tried to do exactly what your sister is doing, act outside the scope of property management." He pulled out another document. "Which brings us to this." The letter was addressed to me, Grandma's handwriting still clear and strong. "Claire, my darling girl, if Howard is showing you this, Then your sister has finally made her move. I'm sorry for the deception, but I knew Sabrina would never let you have the building if she knew the truth. She's too much like my brother Harold sees everything in dollars and cents, never in hearts and souls. The building is yours, legally and completely. Summit Ivy Holdings was my final gift to you. Named after the ivy that grows on the building's east wall, the one you always said made it look like home. Sabrina can raise rents as property manager, but she needs owner approval for any increase over 10%. She doesn't have it. More importantly, check the management agreement. Section 15.3.2. Sabrina should have read the fine print. I've watched you pour your heart into Maple Glen for years. You know every resident's story, every leaky pipe, every dream and worry within those walls. That's why it's yours. Not because you're the best at business, but because you're the best at caring. Make me proud, sweetheart, and don't let your sister's fancy law degree intimidate you. Right is might, and you've got both. All my love, Grandma Edith. P.S. Tell Ruth she was right about the storage room floor. That woman always was too clever for her own good. Tears blurred my vision as I looked up at Howard. Section 15.3.2. His grin widened. Automatic termination of management rights upon any attempt to raise rents more than 10% without documented owner approval. Your sister just fired herself. But she's a lawyer. How did she miss this? Arrogance, mostly. She assumed the family trust owned everything outright. Never bothered to check for encumbrances or alternative ownership structures. He sipped his coffee. Plus, Edith was clever. The LLC filing was done in Delaware. The paperwork buried in routine trust administration. Unless you knew exactly what to look for, she'd never find it. I thought about Sabrina's smug smile, her certainty that she'd won. What do I do now? That's up to you. You could confront her immediately, but he leaned back. Your grandmother left one more piece of advice. Said if this day came, I should suggest you let Sabrina dig her hole a little deeper first. I frowned. What does that mean? Check your building's bank accounts. See if all the rent money is where it should be. Review the maintenance expenses. Your grandmother suspected Sabrina might be skimming, but we never had proof. The implications hit me like a punch. She's been stealing, allegedly, but if she has been, and if she continues thinking she's in charge, he shrugged. Well, embezzlement is a felony, and judges don't look kindly on lawyers who steal from family. I spent the rest of the morning in Howard's office, reviewing documents, understanding the full scope of what Grandma had done. She'd thought of everything: backup documentation, clear chains of ownership, even a transition plan for when the truth came out. One more thing, Howard said as I prepared to leave. He handed me a sealed envelope. Edith said to give you this when you were ready, said you'd know when that was. I held the envelope, my name written across it in Grandma's familiar script. How do I know if I'm ready? I think, Howard said gently, the fact that you're asking means you are. I opened it in my car. Rain drumming on the roof. Inside was a single photo Grandma and me at the building's entrance. Taken the day she'd made me property manager. On the back, she'd written, "The building was never about the bricks, sweetheart. It was about trust. I trust you. Now trust yourself." Ruth was waiting when I got back to Maple Glen, practically vibrating with curiosity. Well, what did you find? I looked at her, then at the building, my building. I realized with a shock. Through the lobby windows, I could see Mr. Petrov teaching the Nguyen children to play chess, Mrs. Rodriguez knitting in her favorite corner, my residence, my responsibility, my family of choice. I found out Grandma was even smarter than we thought, I said finally, and that Sabrina is about to learn a very expensive lesson about reading the fine print. So what's our next move? Ruth asked, eyes gleaming with an anticipation that made her look decades younger. I thought about Sabrina's rent notices still sitting on my desk, about the residents waiting anxiously to know their fate, about the developers circling like sharks. Then I thought about Grandma's trust, Howard's advice, and the bank statements I needed to review. Now, I said, squaring my shoulders, we start documenting everything, Every conversation, every transaction, every single thing Sabrina does from this moment forward. And then we wait, I smiled, feeling Grandma's strategic mind working through me. We let her think she's won. We let her get comfortable. And when she's shown everyone exactly who she really is, we show her the door, Ruth finished, grinning wickedly. As we walked into the building together, I felt the weight of responsibility, but also the warmth of purpose. Grandma had given me more than a building. She'd given me the tools to protect it, the wisdom to use them wisely, and the reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't immediate. Sometimes it's just justice, served at exactly the right temperature. The chess game Grandma had started 3 years ago was entering its final phase, and thanks to her brilliant forward thinking, I held all the pieces that mattered. Check. The bank manager's face went pale as she scrolled through the account records on her screen. Ms. Maddox, these withdrawals, they're substantial. I sat across from her in the small office at First National, my stomach churning as she turned the monitor toward me. Ruth sat beside me, her hand gripping mine under the desk. $92,000, I whispered, staring at the systematic withdrawals over the past 2 years. She stole $92,000. Each transaction was carefully crafted maintenance expenses, emergency repairs, vendor payments, but Howard had taught me what to look for, and Ruth's 40 years of legal secretary experience helped us spot the patterns. The same vendor names appearing monthly, the round numbers that real repairs never came to, the signatures that didn't match our actual maintenance crew's paperwork. The building's emergency fund is completely drained, the manager confirmed, and these transfers to personal accounts. Can you trace where the money went? Ruth asked, her voice sharp. We'll need a formal investigation, but preliminary review shows transfers to an account under Sabrina Maddox's name and several credit card payments. She printed out the statements, stamping them with the bank's official seal. I'll need to file a suspicious activity report. Outside the bank, I had to sit on a bench, overwhelmed by the betrayal. Ruth rubbed my back as I processed what we'd discovered. She was stealing while Grandma was dying, I said, voice cracking. While I was taking care of the building, thinking we were all working together, she was robbing us blind. And now she wants to raise rents to cover her tracks, Ruth said grimly. Force out the long-term residents who might ask questions. Bring in new ones who don't know the building's history. My phone buzzed a text from Sabrina. Did you distribute the notices? I need confirmation by 5 p.m. I stared at the message, rage building in my chest. Then I typed back, meeting with residents tonight. We'll update after. What are you planning? Ruth asked. Howard said to let her dig the hole deeper. I stood, newfound determination straightening my spine. So let's give her a shovel. That evening, I called a residents' meeting in the community room. Every unit was represented families clutching the rent increase notices I'd finally distributed. Elderly residents looking frightened. Young couples calculating desperately on their phones. I know you're all worried, I began, standing at the front of the room. The rent increases are shocking, and I want you to know I'm doing everything I can to fight this. How can you fight? Mr. Petrov called out. Your sister owns building now. No. I chose my words carefully. The ownership structure is complicated. What I can tell you is that no one should make any decisions about moving yet. I'm working with legal counsel to review our options. Legal counsel. Mrs. Rodriguez looked hopeful. You think there's a chance? I think Grandma Edith wouldn't have wanted this. I met eyes around the room, and I think she was too smart to leave us unprotected. The meeting continued for another hour. Residents sharing their fears, their anger, their memories of Grandma. I took notes, recorded everything with their permission, building the case Howard said we'd need. As people filed out, the Nguyen family approached me. Miss Claire, Mrs. Nguyen said softly, we found apartment in Gresham, but we wait. Yes, you really think you can stop this? I thought about the ownership documents in my safe, about Sabrina's embezzlement, about the careful trap Grandma had laid. I know I can trust me a little longer. After everyone left, I found Ruth still sitting in the community room, going through her notebook. I've been tracking things, she said. Every time Sabrina visited the building, every interaction with residents, every complaint we've received. Did you know she's been having her lawyer friends send threatening letters to anyone who's been late on rent? What? I grabbed the letters she showed me. These are horrible. Mrs. Chen was 2 days late because her Social Security check was delayed, and they threatened eviction. Building a paper trail of problem tenants, Ruth said disgustedly, making it easier to force them out later. My phone rang Sabrina. Claire, I just got off a call with Apex Development, she said without preamble. They're very interested in the building, but they need us to be at 50% occupancy or less to make their offer. The rent increases are just phase 1. I hit record on my phone, gesturing for Ruth to stay quiet. Phase 1. Once the bleeding hearts move out, we'll find code violations for the rest. Bedbugs are always effective. People flee from those, and you can't prove where they came from, she laughed. By summer, we'll have a clear building and an 8-figure offer. 8 figures. I kept my voice neutral, playing dumb. At least, this location is gold for luxury condos. Daddy's already looking at retirement properties in Scottsdale with his share. And the current residents, not our problem, her voice hardened. You need to stop coddling them, Claire. This is business. Either you're with the family on this, or you're against us. I'm just trying to understand the plan. The plan is simple. We maximize value. We sell. We move on. Grandma held us back for decades with her ridiculous sentimentality. She's gone now. And it's time to act like the landlords we are, not social workers. Right, I swallowed my anger. I'll work on the residents. Good. And Claire, remember, your below-market rent was conditional on your cooperation. I'd hate to have to evict my own sister. She hung up, and I looked at Ruth. Did you hear that? Every disgusting word. Ruth was practically vibrating with fury. She just confessed to planning to fabricate bedbug infestations. That's fraud, dear. I saved the recording, emailing it immediately to Howard with a backup to my personal cloud storage. Then I sat back, thinking about the envelope Howard had given me Grandma's final piece of advice. I opened it again, rereading the short note inside. When she threatens family, she's shown her true colors. Time to show yours. What do you think that means? Ruth asked, reading over my shoulder. I thought about Sabrina's words. Your below-market rent was conditional on your cooperation. The threat to evict me. Her own sister. If I didn't help her destroy our residents' lives. It means Grandma knew exactly who Sabrina was, I said slowly. And she knew that eventually, Sabrina would threaten to destroy me too if I didn't fall in line. So what do we do? I stood, feeling something shift inside me. The scared little sister was gone, replaced by the woman Grandma had trained me to be protector of this building and its people. We document everything, we build an airtight case, and then, I smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. Then we show everyone exactly what Sabrina Maddox is willing to do for money, including betraying her own family. Ruth grinned back, looking like the legal secretary who'd helped take down corrupt lawyers for 40 years. Now you're talking like Edith's granddaughter. As we locked up the community room, I looked at the building's walls solid, dependable, sheltering. Grandma had trusted me with more than property. She'd trusted me with homes, with lives, with the very concept of community in a world that increasingly valued only profit. Sabrina thought she held all the cards. She had no idea the game had changed completely. And I was done playing by her rules. The next 2 weeks became a masterclass in strategic patience, while Sabrina believed I was cowing residents into submission. Ruth and I were building something else entirely, an unshakable foundation of evidence. Our command center was Ruth's apartment, her dining table disappearing under color-coded folders, bank statements, and printed emails. We worked like detectives, or perhaps more accurately, like Grandma Edith would have worked methodically, carefully, with purpose. Look at this, Ruth said one evening, pointing to a spreadsheet she'd created. Every maintenance expense Sabrina approved in the last 2 years. See the pattern? I leaned over her shoulder, studying the numbers. They're all just under $10,000. The threshold requiring board approval. She kept everything below the limit where Mom and Dad would have to sign off. Ruth highlighted row after row. And look at the vendor names: Mercury Maintenance, Atlas Repairs, Phoenix Property Services. They all sound legitimate. They're all incorporated in Delaware, all at the same registered agent address, all formed within days of each other. Ruth pulled up her browser. And none of them have any web presence, reviews, or employee records. They're shell companies. My phone buzzed another text from Sabrina. She'd been checking in daily, pressuring me about resident compliance. This time, she'd sent a photo from a Miami beach. Celebrating the future. Can't wait to close the Apex deal. Thanks for handling the difficult conversations, sis. I showed Ruth the message. She snorted. Celebrating with stolen money. Document that 2 location services show she's at the Ritz-Carlton. Their rooms are $800 a night. We photographed everything, creating both digital and physical copies. Howard had emphasized the importance of redundancy. Assume someone will try to destroy evidence, he'd warned, because they will. The residents, meanwhile, were holding strong. Word had spread through the building that I was fighting for them, and they'd responded with their own form of resistance. Mrs. Rodriguez organized a phone tree. The Nguyen family started a building newsletter documenting memories of Grandma Edith. Mr. Petrov began teaching free chess lessons to any child in the building, creating a sense of community Sabrina couldn't price out. We're not just numbers on her spreadsheet, Mrs. Rodriguez told me fiercely. We're neighbors. We're family. It was Mr. Petrov who provided our next breakthrough. He knocked on my door one morning, holding a manila envelope. I am remembering something, he said in his careful English. Your grandmother. She asked me to keep this. Said someday you might need. I forget after she died. But cleaning closet today, I find... Inside were photographs Sabrina entering the building at various times, all date stamped during my Tuesday supply runs. But more importantly, there were photos of her with a man I didn't recognize, the 2 of them reviewing documents in the lobby. Who is this? I asked. Marcus Wolf, Mr. Petrov said. From Apex Development. They meet many times before your grandmother died, always when you gone. My blood chilled. Sabrina had been planning this before Grandma was even gone. Ruth immediately began cross-referencing the dates with Grandma's medical records. Claire, she said slowly, these meetings, they coincide with your grandmother's bad days, days when she was on heavy pain medication. Sabrina was meeting with developers while Grandma was suffering upstairs. Worse, Ruth's voice was grim. Look at this signature on the preliminary agreement with Apex. It's dated 2 weeks before Edith died. I stared at what was clearly meant to be Grandma's signature, but wasn't. She forged it. Or got it when Edith wasn't lucid. Either way. Ruth trailed off. But we both knew the implications. This went beyond embezzlement. This was elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy. That night, I called Howard. We need to move soon. Sabrina's getting impatient, and I'm worried she'll escalate. Do you have enough evidence? I looked around Ruth's apartment at our war room of documentation. We have proof of embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy with Apex, forged signatures, and recorded admissions of planning to fabricate code violations. Is that enough? Howard chuckled. Edith would be so proud. Yes, that's more than enough. But there's one more thing: we need a public forum where Sabrina can't control the narrative. What kind of forum? Patience. I'm arranging something. Keep documenting, and be ready to move when I give the signal. 2 days later, Sabrina escalated exactly as I'd feared. She showed up with 3 men in suits, lawyers from her firm. We're conducting unit inspections, she announced in the lobby, loud enough for everyone to hear. Looking for lease violations, unauthorized occupants, any health code issues. You need to give 24-hour notice for inspections, I said calmly. Not for suspected health hazards, She smiled that sharp smile. We've had reports of pest activity. From whom? Anonymous complaints, very serious ones. She gestured to her lawyers. My colleagues will be documenting everything. I suggest you tell your residents to cooperate fully. I knew this was the manufactured crisis she'd threatened, but I played along. Of course, though I should mention, we just had our quarterly pest inspection last week. Clean bill of health. Her smile flickered. We'll see about that. The lawyers spent 4 hours going through units, photographing everything, clearly looking for any excuse to issue violations. But our residents were ready. Mrs. Rodriguez had organized a cleaning brigade the night before. Every unit was spotless. Every lease term followed to the letter. Nothing, one lawyer reported to Sabrina. These are some of the cleanest units I've inspected. Sabrina's face darkened. Check again. We've checked 3 times. There's nothing here that violates any codes or lease terms. She turned on me. What did you do? My job, I said simply. I manage a well-maintained building with responsible tenants, just like Grandma taught me. Her composure finally cracked. You think you're so clever, fine. We'll do this the hard way. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Mom, Dad, and Uncle Richard. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. We're voting on immediate management changes. Looking forward to it, I said. She stared at me, probably wondering why I wasn't panicking. You should be worried. Claire, when the board votes you out, you'll have 30 days to vacate your apartment, below market rate or not. We'll see. After she left with her legal entourage, Ruth emerged from her apartment where she'd been recording everything through her door's peephole. Did you get it all? Every word, dear, including her admission that the pest reports were fake. Ruth grinned. She really doesn't learn, does she? I thought about tomorrow's board meeting, about the family that had chosen Sabrina's money over my community. They thought they were gathering to remove me. They had no idea they were walking into Grandma Edith's final checkmate. No, I said, feeling remarkably calm. She doesn't, but she's about to. I spent that night preparing, gathering every piece of evidence, every document, every recording. Howard had said to wait for his signal, and I trusted him the way Grandma had. Tomorrow, my family would learn who really owned Maple Glen Apartments, and Sabrina would discover that sometimes the little sister you've underestimated your whole life is exactly the opponent you should have feared most. The building was quiet as I finally went to bed, but I could feel it like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for justice. Grandma, I thought, looking at her photo on my nightstand, I hope I make you proud tomorrow. Somehow, I knew I would. The doorbell rang at 8 a.m., 6 hours before the board meeting that was supposed to seal my fate. I opened it to find my parents standing there, my mother clutching her purse like armor, my father avoiding eye contact. We need to talk, Mom said, pushing past me into my apartment. This has gone too far. Claire. Dad followed, looking around my modest living room with an expression I couldn't read. They'd rarely visited since Grandma died, too busy with their retirement plans, their golf club memberships, their new life funded by Sabrina's success. Would you like coffee? I offered, playing the dutiful daughter one last time. This isn't a social visit. Mom settled onto my couch like a judge preparing to pass sentence. Sabrina called us last night. She says you're being obstructive, turning the residents against her, sabotaging the sale. I'm protecting our residents. Mom, families who've lived here for decades. They're not our residents, Dad interrupted, finally meeting my eyes. They're tenants, and it's time you understood the difference. The words stung more than I expected. Grandma understood the difference. She chose to care anyway. Your grandmother was from a different time, Mom said dismissively. She let emotion cloud her business judgment. We won't make the same mistake. Emotion. I felt my carefully maintained calm beginning to crack. Is that what you call treating people with dignity? We call it being practical, Dad said. Sabrina has shown us the numbers. This building is worth $12 million as luxury condos. That's $3 million for you. Claire, enough to set you up for life. I don't want the money. Then you're a fool. Mom's words were sharp, final, just like Mother, clinging to old-fashioned ideas while the world moves on. I studied my parents, these people who'd raised me, who'd taught me to share and be kind and help others. When did they become these cold strangers who saw dollar signs instead of human beings? What happened to you? I asked quietly. When did you become people who would throw families onto the street for money? When we realized we'd spent our whole lives being poor while others got rich, Dad said bitterly. Your grandmother had $1 million asset and let people live in it for peanuts. We won't make that mistake. Those peanuts kept roofs over heads, food on tables, children in schools. Not our problem, Mom echoed Sabrina's words from weeks ago. Claire, you need to decide which side you're on, your family or strangers. The residents aren't strangers. They're nothing to us. Mom cut me off. You have until the meeting to decide. Support Sabrina's plan, or we'll vote you out as property manager. And yes, that means you'll lose your apartment too. Below market rent is for family who acts like family. They stood to leave, but I couldn't let them go without trying one more time. What if I told you Sabrina's been stealing, that she's been embezzling from the building for years? Mom laughed, actually laughed. Sabrina, she makes more in a month than you make in a year. Why would she need to steal? Greed, Mom, pure greed. You're pathetic, she said, and the contempt in her voice broke something inside me. Making up lies about your successful sister because you're jealous. We raised you better than this. No, I said quietly. Grandma raised me better than this. You just happened to be there. Mom's face flushed. You ungrateful little... I think you should leave, I said, opening my door. I'll see you at the meeting. With your resignation letter, I hope, Dad said as they left. It's the only sensible move you have left. After they were gone, I sank onto my couch, shaking. Ruth appeared moments later. She had an uncanny ability to know when I needed support. I heard raised voices, she said gently, sitting beside me. Your parents. They're choosing money over everything Grandma believed in, I whispered. They actually laughed when I mentioned Sabrina's theft. Because they don't want to believe it. It's easier to paint you as the jealous failure than admit their golden child is a criminal. Ruth patted my hand. But the truth has a way of coming out, especially in board meetings. My phone buzzed a text from Howard. Change of plans. Can you get everyone to the community room at 1:30 before the board meeting? I showed Ruth the message. What do you think he's planning? Something Edith would approve of, she said with a knowing smile. That man never did anything without 3 backup plans. We spent the next hours preparing, making copies of crucial documents, organizing evidence in a presentation that even my parents couldn't dismiss. At 1 p.m., I sent a building-wide message, important meeting in community room at 1:30. Your future here depends on it. By 1:25, the room was packed. Every resident was there, from the young families to the elderly, all facing an uncertain future. The anxiety in the room was palpable. At exactly 1:30, Howard walked in, but he wasn't alone. A court reporter followed him, setting up equipment, and behind them came 3 people I didn't recognize, all carrying official-looking briefcases. Ladies and gentlemen, Howard announced, I'm Howard Dade, attorney for the true owner of Maple Glen Apartments. We're here to inform you that despite what you've been told, your homes are safe. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. I stood up. Howard, what's happening? He smiled. What's happening is transparency. These are representatives from the state attorney's office, the Department of Consumer Protection, and the Real Estate Commission. They're very interested in what's been happening at Maple Glen. The door burst open. Sabrina stood there, face flushed with anger, our parents and Uncle Richard behind her. What is this? The board meeting is in my office. No, Howard said calmly. The board meeting is wherever the owner decides to hold it, and the owner has decided on the community room. I'm the managing partner of the family trust, Sabrina sputtered. I decide. You're the former managing partner, I said, standing up. As of Howard, As of 1:27 p.m., when you attempted to raise rents over 10% without owner approval, triggering the automatic termination clause in Section 15.3.2 of the management agreement. Sabrina's face went white. What are you talking about? The family trust owns the building. No, I said, pulling out the ownership documents. I do. Summit Ivy Holdings, LLC, sole proprietor Claire Elizabeth Maddox, has been for 3 years. The room erupted. Residents gasped. My parents stared in shock, and Sabrina looked like she'd been punched. That's impossible, she said. I would have known. You would have, if you'd done proper due diligence instead of assuming you knew everything. Howard opened his briefcase. But that's not the only reason we're here today. The state attorney representative stepped forward. Ms. Sabrina Maddox, we've received credible evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and elder abuse. We'll need you to come with us for questioning. This is ridiculous. Sabrina backed toward the door. You can't prove anything. Actually, I said, pulling up my phone, I played the recording of her admitting to planning fake bedbug infestations, to meeting with Apex Development, to forcing out residents. The room listened in horrified silence as Sabrina's own words condemned her. Additionally, Ruth stood up, holding her meticulously organized folders. We have documented evidence of $92,000 in fraudulent withdrawals, shell companies created to siphon building funds, and forged signatures on contracts with developers while Mrs. Edith Maddox was on her deathbed. The government officials moved toward Sabrina, who looked desperately at our parents. Mom, Dad, tell them this is a mistake. But our parents were staring at the evidence being displayed, the color draining from their faces as they realized their golden child was exactly what I'd tried to tell them, a thief and a fraud. Sabrina, Mom whispered, is this true? I was trying to maximize value, Sabrina shouted. For all of us, Claire doesn't understand business. Claire understands that business without ethics is just theft with extra steps, Howard said. Your grandmother knew that. It's why she made sure Claire would be here to stop you. As the officials led Sabrina away, she turned to look at me one last time. You ruined everything. No, I said quietly. You ruined everything the day you decided money mattered more than people. I just made sure you couldn't hurt anyone else. The room was silent after she left, everyone processing what they'd witnessed. Then Mr. Petrov started clapping. Slowly, Mrs. Rodriguez joined him, then the Nguyen family, and soon the entire room was applauding. My parents stood frozen by the door, looking lost. For a moment, I felt sorry for them. Their retirement dreams funded by Sabrina's success were crumbling before their eyes. Claire, Dad said hoarsely, we didn't know. You didn't want to know, I corrected gently. It was easier to believe I was jealous than to believe she was corrupt. They left without another word, shoulders slumped with the weight of their choices. Uncle Richard slunk out behind them, probably calculating how much of his investment in Sabrina's schemes he'd lost. Howard waited until the room settled before speaking again. Now then, as the owner's attorney, I'm authorized to announce that all rent increase notices are hereby rescinded. Rents will remain at current levels, with only cost of living adjustments as outlined in your original leases. The cheer that went up could probably be heard 3 blocks away. 3 weeks had passed since Sabrina's arrest, and the family meeting my mother had called felt like walking into an ambush. She'd chosen neutral ground, a private room at the Hilton downtown, but nothing about this felt neutral. The entire extended family was there, cousins I hadn't seen in years, aunts and uncles who'd always favored Sabrina, distant relatives who probably came for the drama. They filled the conference room, their faces a mix of curiosity, judgment, and barely concealed hostility. Sabrina sat at the head of the table like she still owned the room, out on bail, dressed in her sharpest suit. She'd clearly been working the crowd before I arrived. Her lawyer sat beside her, a shark in Italian leather. Finally, Mom said as I entered with Howard, we can begin. I took the only empty seat, directly across from Sabrina. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. We're here, Mom announced, to discuss the future of Maple Glen Apartments and the damage done to this family's reputation. The only damage, Aunt Patricia interjected, glaring at me, was caused by Claire's vindictive persecution of her own sister. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. They'd already chosen their narrative. I was the jealous younger sister who'd destroyed the successful one out of spite. Claire has torn this family apart, Uncle Richard added. Over what, a building full of low-income renters. She could have had millions. Those low-income renters are human beings, I said quietly, with families, jobs, lives that matter. More than your own family, Cousin Derek sneered. You had Sabrina arrested, your own sister. I reported evidence of embezzlement and fraud to the proper authorities, I corrected. The state arrested her based on that evidence. Alleged evidence, Sabrina's lawyer interjected smoothly. My client maintains her innocence and looks forward to clearing her name in court. Sabrina leaned forward, and I saw it again, that smile that had haunted my childhood, the one she wore when she knew she was winning. I've made a generous offer, she said, sliding a document across the table. Despite everything, I'm willing to buy Claire out. $20 million for the building. That's $5 million more than market value. All she has to do is sign. The room buzzed with excitement. $20 million. More money than any of us had ever dreamed of. Think of what you could do with that money. Claire, Mom urged. You could go back to school, travel, never worry about money again. And the residents, I asked, what happens to them? Sabrina shrugged. Not our problem once the sale goes through. There it is, I said, looking around the room. In one sentence, everything wrong with this family's values. Not our problem. I stood up, pulling out my laptop. You want to talk about damage to this family's reputation? Let me show you what real damage looks like. Howard helped me connect to the room's projection system. The first slide appeared Grandma Edith's photo. This is the woman who built our family's legacy, I began. She bought Maple Glen in 1976 with every penny she'd saved, not as an investment, but as a mission. She'd been evicted 3 times as a child during the Depression. She knew what it meant to lose your home. I clicked to the next slide, photos of longtime residents. Mrs. Rodriguez has lived here for 22 years. She raised 3 children in apartment 3C, all of whom graduated college. Mr. Petrov fled the Soviet Union with nothing but the clothes on his back. Maple Glen was his first real home in America. Sob stories don't pay bills, someone muttered. No, but apparently embezzlement does. I clicked again, displaying the forensic accounting report. $92,000 stolen over 2 years, shell companies, forged signatures, all while our grandmother was dying. Alleged, Sabrina's lawyer protested. Documented, I countered, showing bank records. Every transaction traced, every false vendor identified. But that's not the worst part. The next slide showed email exchanges between Sabrina and Apex Development. These emails date back 3 years. While Grandma was suffering from cancer, while I was caring for her in the building, Sabrina was secretly negotiating to sell to developers. I clicked through email after email, each more damning than the last. The room grew quieter with each revelation. The old bat can't last much longer. I read from one email. Once she's gone, we can move forward with the full redevelopment plan. Gasps echoed through the room. Even Sabrina's supporters looked uncomfortable. That's taken out of context, Sabrina said, but her voice had lost its confidence. Then let's add context. I played the audio recording of her admitting to planning fake bedbug infestations, to forcing out families, to seeing residents as obstacles to profit. When her voice on the recording said, "They're not our problem," I saw Mom flinch. But the real context, I continued, is this. I showed the video Howard had revealed at the resident meeting, Grandma Edith's final message. The room watched in silence as Grandma, frail but fierce, looked into the camera. If you're watching this, it means Sabrina has shown her true colors. I've known for some time that she sees Maple Glen as nothing but dollar signs. That's why I've taken steps to protect it. Claire, my darling, you understand what I've spent my life building. It's not about the property, it's about the promise. The promise that everyone deserves a safe, affordable home, that community matters more than profit, that we take care of each other. Grandma's image paused, seeming to look directly at each person in the room. To my family watching this, I know you'll be angry. I know you'll feel cheated out of money you think you deserve. But ask yourself, what legacy do you want to leave? Do you want to be remembered as the family who got rich by making others homeless, or the family who stood for something more? The video ended. The silence was deafening. She was sick, Sabrina said desperately, not thinking clearly. Her medical records show she was completely lucid when this was recorded. Howard interjected. As 3 doctors have already testified. This is what you're protecting, Uncle Richard accused, turning on me. This bleeding heart nonsense that keeps us all poor. Poor. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You drive a BMW. You vacation in Europe. You own 3 rental properties. You're not poor. You're just not as rich as you think you deserve to be. And what's wrong with wanting more? Aunt Patricia demanded. Nothing, unless more comes at the cost of destroying lives. I looked around the room. Grandma built something beautiful, a place where refugees could find safety, where single mothers could afford to raise their children, where elderly people could age with dignity. And you want to tear it down for condos that will sit empty, owned by foreign investors as tax shelters. You're being dramatic, Mom said, but her voice wavered. Am I? I pulled up local news articles. This is what happens when buildings like ours get redeveloped. Homeless encampments, families sleeping in cars, children changing schools 3 times in a year because their parents can't find stable housing. I turned to Sabrina. This is your legacy. This is what you want the Maddox name associated with. The Maddox name should be associated with success, she shot back, with wealth and power and embezzlement, I interrupted, because that's what the headlines say now. Prominent lawyer charged with stealing from family property. Elder abuse alleged in real estate scheme. Is that the reputation you wanted? Sabrina's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook him off. You did this. You destroyed my career, my reputation, everything. No, Sabrina. You did that the moment you decided stealing was easier than earning. I closed my laptop. I'm not selling. Not to you. Not to developers. Not to anyone who sees homes as just investments. Then you're a fool, she spat. And when you're old and still managing that decrepit building, remember you could have had millions. I'll remember that I kept families in their homes, that I honored Grandma's legacy, that I chose people over profit. I stood to leave. And I'll sleep perfectly well. This isn't over, Sabrina called after me. The trial hasn't even started. I'll beat these charges. And when I do, when you do. I turned back. You'll still be someone who tried to make families homeless for money. No verdict can change that. I walked toward the door, Howard beside me. But Mom's voice stopped me. Claire, wait. I turned to see tears on my mother's face, the first real emotion I'd seen from her in years. I remember when Mother bought Maple Glen, she said softly. I was 12. She was so proud. Said it was proof that in America, even someone like her could make a difference. She did make a difference, Mom, to hundreds of lives. I know, Mom's voice broke. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that mattered. I crossed back to her, taking her hands. It's not too late to remember. The room erupted in arguments, some family members defending Sabrina, others beginning to question what they'd supported. But I didn't stay to listen. I'd said what I needed to say, shown what they needed to see. As Howard and I waited for the elevator, he chuckled. Edith would have enjoyed that. You played it perfectly. I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the most powerful play of all. As we rode down, I thought about Sabrina's threat. This isn't over. She was right. The criminal trial was coming. She'd fight with everything she had. But I had something she didn't, a building full of people who mattered, a grandmother's wisdom guiding me, and the knowledge that I was on the right side. The war wasn't over, but this battle was mine, The courtroom was packed on the first day of Sabrina's trial. Media coverage had turned what might have been a routine embezzlement case into a symbol of the city's housing crisis. Lawyer sister versus property manager sister made for irresistible headlines. I sat in the gallery between Ruth and Howard, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Across the aisle, my parents sat behind Sabrina, their presence a show of support that still stung. They'd chosen their side, even after everything they'd learned. Sabrina looked composed at the defendant's table. Her attorney, a high-profile defense lawyer, known for getting wealthy clients acquitted whispering last-minute strategy. She'd pleaded not guilty to all charges: embezzlement, fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Patricia Hernandez presiding. Judge Hernandez, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, took her seat. "We're here for the matter of State versus Sabrina Maddox. Is the prosecution ready?" "We are, Your Honor." Assistant District Attorney James Wright stood. He was younger than I'd expected, but there was steel in his voice. "Defense." "Ready, Your Honor." Sabrina's lawyer, Marcus Steinberg, responded smoothly. "Miss Wright, your opening statement." The prosecutor approached the jury box. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about betrayal. Betrayal of family trust, betrayal of fiduciary duty, and most critically, betrayal of an elderly woman who was dying of cancer while the defendant plotted to steal her life's work." He outlined the evidence methodically. The shell companies, the forged signatures, the missing $92,000. With each point, I watched the jurors' faces grow more serious. "The defense will try to paint this as a family dispute," Wright continued. "They'll say Ms. Claire Maddox is a jealous sister, that this is about inheritance and hurt feelings. But the evidence will show something far darker: a calculated scheme to defraud not just a building, but the vulnerable residents who called it home." Steinberg's opening was exactly what Wright had predicted. "This is indeed a family dispute," he said with practiced sympathy, "a tragic misunderstanding between sisters, complicated by grief and conflicting visions for a family property. My client, Sabrina Maddox, is a respected attorney with an impeccable record. She's being persecuted by a sister who resented her success and manipulated their dying grandmother into cutting the family out of their rightful inheritance." I felt Ruth's hand squeeze mine as Steinberg continued. "We'll show that every action Ms. Maddox took was within her legal rights as the appointed manager of the family trust, that what the prosecution calls embezzlement was actually legitimate business expenses, that Claire Maddox, motivated by spite, has orchestrated this entire prosecution to destroy her sister's career." The first witness was the forensic accountant. She walked the jury through the financial records with devastating precision. These vendor companies, Mercury Maintenance, Atlas Repairs, Phoenix Property Services, they all share the same Delaware registration address. None have employees, equipment, or any history of actual work performed. "And where did the money go?" Wright asked. "To accounts controlled by the defendant. We traced $92,000 in payments to these shell companies, all of which ended up funding personal expenses, vacations, luxury goods, credit card payments." Steinberg tried to shake her on cross-examination, suggesting the expenses were legitimate business entertainment, that the companies were real contractors, but the accountant held firm, producing documentation that demolished each claim. The second day brought the property records expert. This signature, purportedly Edith Maddox's authorization for preliminary sales agreements with Apex Development, was made 2 weeks before her death when hospital records show she was heavily sedated and physically unable to write. "Objection," Steinberg called. "The witness isn't a medical expert." "I'm not testifying to her medical condition," the expert clarified. "I'm testifying that the handwriting analysis shows clear signs of forgery, inconsistent pressure, letter formations that don't match authenticated samples, and most tellingly, the signature was written with a Mont Blanc pen that records show the defendant purchased 3 days before this document was signed." The third day was the hardest. The prosecution played my recordings of Sabrina, her admission about planning fake bedbug infestations, Her callous dismissal of residents' lives, her meetings with developers while Grandma was dying upstairs. Her voice filled the courtroom. They're not our problem once the sale goes through. I watched my parents as they heard their successful daughter's true nature laid bare. Mom's face had gone pale. Dad stared at his hands. Then came my turn to testify. State your name for the record, Wright began after I was sworn in. Claire Elizabeth Maddox. What was your relationship with Edith Maddox? She was my grandmother, but more than that, she was my mentor, my example of how to live with purpose. Wright led me through the timeline, discovering the rent increases, finding the hidden documents, uncovering the embezzlement. I kept my voice steady, focusing on facts rather than emotions. Why didn't you immediately confront your sister when you discovered you owned the building? On the advice of counsel, we wanted to document the full extent of the fraud first. Also, I paused, choosing my words carefully. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped there was an explanation that didn't involve my sister stealing from dying grandmother. And was there such an explanation? No. The evidence only pointed to one conclusion: Sabrina had been systematically defrauding the building while planning to sell it to developers against Grandma's express wishes. Steinberg's cross-examination was brutal. Isn't it true you've always resented your sister's success? I've never resented Sabrina's legitimate success. I resented her treating our grandmother's legacy as a piggy bank. You lived in that building at below-market rent for years, didn't you? I did. In exchange for managing the property, maintaining it, and being on call 24/7 for emergencies. While your sister worked 60-hour weeks building her career, while my sister apparently worked those hours planning to steal from our family business, yes. He tried angle after angle, painting me as lazy, jealous, manipulative, but I had truth on my side, and truth has a way of standing firm against accusations. You secretly inherited a $12 million building and didn't tell your family for 3 years. Doesn't that make you the deceptive one? I didn't know I'd inherited it until after Sabrina tried to destroy the lives of dozens of families. My grandmother structured it that way to protect those families from exactly what Sabrina attempted. On the 4th day, the residents testified. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke about raising her children at Maple Glen, about the community Grandma had built. Mr. Petrov described fleeing persecution, finding safety in apartment 2B. The Nguyen family talked about starting their American dream in a place that welcomed them. The defendant saw us as obstacles to profit, Mrs. Rodriguez said, tears in her eyes. But Mrs. Edith saw us as people, as family. Steinberg tried to dismiss them as biased, but their dignity and honesty resonated with the jury. The most dramatic moment came when Sabrina took the stand in her own defense. Steinberg tried to paint her as a dedicated daughter trying to maximize value for her family, but Wright's cross-examination was surgical. You met with Apex Development while your grandmother was dying. I was exploring options for the family's future. Yes or no, did you meet with developers while your grandmother was in hospice care? Yes, but did you tell her about these meetings? She wasn't in a condition to understand complex business. So that's a no. Did you tell your sister, who was caring for your grandmother daily? Claire wouldn't have understood. Another no. Did you create shell companies to bill the building for work that was never performed? Those were legitimate vendors. Wright produced the evidence again, piece by damning piece. With each question, Sabrina's composed facade cracked a little more. Ms. Maddox, in this recorded conversation, you said you planned to make staying uncomfortable enough that residents would leave voluntarily. What did you mean? I was speaking hypothetically about introducing bedbugs. That's your hypothesis. The jury looked disgusted. Sabrina's attempts to explain only deepened the hole she'd dug. In closing arguments, Wright was devastating. The defendant wants you to believe this is about family jealousy, but embezzlement isn't a family dispute. Fraud isn't a sibling rivalry. Elder abuse isn't a difference of opinion. These are crimes, and the evidence proves beyond reasonable doubt that Sabrina Maddox committed them. Steinberg made one last attempt, arguing that Sabrina had acted within the law as she understood it, that any irregularities were honest mistakes, that sending her to prison would destroy a promising career over what amounted to aggressive business practices. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Hernandez asked. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of embezzlement in the first degree, how do you find guilty? On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of elder abuse, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, guilty." With each guilty, I watched Sabrina shrink in her chair. The composed, confident sister who'd smirked while tripling my rent was gone. In her place sat someone forced to face the consequences of her choices. Mom sobbed quietly. Dad's face was stone. They'd backed the wrong daughter, and now everyone knew it. Judge Hernandez scheduled sentencing for the following month. As court officers prepared to take Sabrina into custody, her bail revoked after the guilty verdict, she turned to look at me. For a moment, I saw my sister, not the predator she'd become, but the girl who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd snuck me cookies when Mom said no. Then the moment passed, and her face hardened. "I hope you're happy," she said. "I'm not," I replied honestly, "but I am relieved that you can't hurt anyone else." As they led her away, I stood on shaking legs. Ruth hugged me. Howard patted my shoulder, and the residents who'd come to support me offered quiet congratulations. But there was no joy in winning, only the sad satisfaction of knowing I'd done what was necessary to protect the people who depended on me. Justice had been served, but it tasted like ashes. The morning of Sabrina's sentencing arrived gray and drizzling, fitting weather for what felt like a funeral. I dressed carefully in the navy suit Grandma had bought me for my college graduation. "Every woman needs one perfect suit," she'd said. Today seemed like the right time to wear it. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. The case had become a symbol of the city's housing crisis, with editorial writers using phrases like greed versus community and the human cost of gentrification. I kept my head down, letting Howard guide me through the mob of cameras and microphones. Inside, the gallery was packed again, but this time, I noticed new faces: other property managers, tenant advocates, even city council members. What had started as a family dispute had become something larger. My parents sat in their usual spot, looking older than I'd ever seen them. Mom had called several times since the verdict, leaving voicemails I couldn't bring myself to return. What was there to say? They'd chosen their side, and we all had to live with the consequences. Sabrina entered in custody, wearing county jail orange instead of her designer suits. The month since her conviction had worn on her. Her face was thinner, her perfect posture slightly slumped, but when our eyes met, I still saw defiance there. "All rise," the bailiff called, and Judge Hernandez took her seat. "We're here for sentencing in the matter of State versus Sabrina Maddox. I've reviewed the pre-sentencing report, the victim impact statements, and the arguments from both sides." She looked at Sabrina. "Ms. Maddox, would you like to make a statement before I pronounce sentence?" Sabrina stood, Steinberg beside her. "Yes, Your Honor." She unfolded a piece of paper with shaking hands. "I want to start by saying that I maintain my innocence. I believe I acted within my rights as property manager and in the best interests of my family's financial future." A murmur ran through the gallery. Even now, she couldn't admit what she'd done. "However," she continued, "I acknowledge that my actions caused pain to the residents of Maple Glen Apartments. That was never my intention. I was raised to believe that success meant maximizing profit. That sentiment had no place in business. I see now that this philosophy has cost me everything: my career, my freedom, and my family." She turned to look at me directly. "Claire, I know you think you've won, but what have you really accomplished? You're still managing a rundown building for people who will never appreciate your sacrifice. You'll never have the life you could have had. And for what? So strangers can have cheap rent." "That's enough, Ms. Maddox," Judge Hernandez interrupted. "This is meant to be a statement of remorse, not a continuation of your trial arguments." Sabrina folded her paper. "I'm finished, Your Honor." "Very well. The court has received numerous victim impact statements, but I understand Ms. Claire Maddox wishes to address the court directly. I hadn't planned to speak, but standing there, seeing Sabrina still unrepentant, I knew I had to. Yes, Your Honor. I approached the podium, my prepared statement suddenly feeling inadequate, so I spoke from the heart instead. Your Honor, people keep asking me if I'm happy my sister is going to prison. I'm not. This isn't about happiness, it's about protection. Sabrina stole money. Yes, but she tried to steal something far more valuable, the homes and dignity of dozens of families. I turned to face Sabrina. You ask what I've accomplished. I've kept Mrs. Rodriguez in the apartment where she raised her children. I've ensured Mr. Petrov can grow old in the home he found after fleeing persecution. I've protected the Nguyen family's American dream. That's not nothing. Sabrina, that's everything. My voice grew stronger. You say they'll never appreciate my sacrifice, but you're wrong. Every birthday card from a resident, every child who runs to hug me in the hallway, every thank you from a family that can afford groceries because their rent is reasonable, that's appreciation worth more than any luxury condo development. I looked at Judge Hernandez. Your Honor, my grandmother used to say that we're measured not by what we accumulate, but by what we preserve for others. Sabrina tried to destroy what Grandma preserved. She violated the trust of a dying woman who loved her, stole from families who could least afford it, and even now shows no real remorse. I ask that the court consider not just the financial crimes, but the human cost of her actions. As I returned to my seat, Ruth squeezed my hand. Edith would be so proud, she whispered. Judge Hernandez reviewed her notes before speaking. Ms. Maddox, you were convicted of embezzlement, fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. The pre-sentencing report shows a pattern of deliberate, calculating behavior spanning years. You abused your position of trust, stole from vulnerable residents, and exploited your grandmother's illness for personal gain. She paused, her stern gaze fixed on Sabrina. What troubles this court most is your complete lack of genuine remorse. Even now, you frame your crimes as business decisions, as if that somehow mitigates the harm you've caused. You've shown no understanding of the human impact of your actions. The sentencing guidelines suggest 8 to 12 years. The prosecution has asked for the maximum. The defense requests leniency based on the defendant's lack of prior record and professional accomplishments. My heart pounded as Judge Hernandez continued. However, this court must consider the egregious nature of these crimes. You're an attorney. Ms. Maddox, you knew the law and chose to break it. You used your legal knowledge not to help others, but to construct elaborate schemes to defraud. You betrayed your profession, your family, and most importantly, the vulnerable residents who depended on stable housing. She lifted her gavel. Therefore, this court sentences you to 10 years in state prison with possibility of parole after 7. You're ordered to pay full restitution of $92,000 to Maple Glen Apartments. Upon release, you'll be permanently disbarred from practicing law. You'll serve 5 years probation following your incarceration. The gavel came down with finality. Sabrina swayed on her feet, Steinberg steadying her. 10 years, a decade of her life, gone. This court is adjourned. As officers prepared to lead Sabrina away, my mother suddenly stood. Wait, please, can I speak to my daughter? Judge Hernandez nodded, and the officers allowed Mom to approach. I watched as she reached for Sabrina, who stood stiff and unresponsive. I'm sorry, Mom sobbed. We failed you. We taught you that money mattered more than people, and now I'm paying for believing you, Sabrina said coldly. You all wanted me to be successful, to make you proud, to make us rich. I did what you raised me to do. No, Dad spoke for the first time, his voice broken. We raised you wrong, Claire. He looked at me. Claire learned the right lessons despite us. From Edith, we should have listened to her. Sabrina laughed bitterly. Too late for should-haves. Dad, I hope you enjoy spending my commissary money for the next 10 years. The officers led her away, her orange jumpsuit disappearing through the courtroom doors. My parents stood frozen, watching their golden child vanish into the prison system. Outside, the rain had stopped. Reporters swarmed again, but this time I paused on the courthouse steps. "Ms. Maddox, how do you feel about the sentence?" someone shouted. I thought for a moment. I feel grateful that justice was served, but mostly, I feel sad. Sad that greed destroyed my family. Sad that it took criminal prosecution to stop my sister from making dozens of families homeless. And sad that she still doesn't understand why what she did was wrong. "What's next for Maple Glen Apartments?" another reporter asked. "What's always been next," I said. "We continue being a community. We maintain affordable housing in a city that desperately needs it. We prove that Grandma Edith was right that taking care of each other matters more than maximizing profit. Will you reconcile with your parents?" I glanced back to see them emerging from the courthouse, looking lost and broken. That's up to them. They need to decide what kind of people they want to be. My door is open when they figure that out. Back at Maple Glen, the residents had organized a gathering in the community room. Not a celebration we all understood. This wasn't a happy ending, but a moment of closure. "To Edith Maddox," Mr. Petrov raised his coffee mug, "who saw the future and protected us all. To Claire," Mrs. Rodriguez added, "who had the courage to do what was right, even when it cost her everything." "It didn't cost me everything," I said, looking around at their faces. "It showed me what I really had all along. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who stand with you, who trust you, who make a community worth protecting." Ruth pulled out a photo Grandma and me, taken the day she'd secretly made me the owner. She knew. Didn't she knew this day would come? "She knew Sabrina," I said, "and she knew me. Most importantly, she knew what mattered." As the gathering wound down and residents returned to their apartments, their secure, affordable apartments, I went to my office. On the wall hung Grandma's favorite quote, cross-stitched and framed. "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." Sabrina had chased the living and lost everything. I'd protected what we could give, and in doing so, found my life's purpose. The phone rang. Another property management company, probably calling to offer me a job again. They'd been calling since the trial started. Impressed by my principles and dedication, I let it go to voicemail. I had work to do, maintenance schedules to review, a new family moving into 4A next week, Mr. Petrov's chess club to help organize. Life at Maple Glen went on, as Grandma had intended. 10 years. Sabrina would serve 10 years for trying to destroy all this. And I'd spend those same 10 years and many more making sure her greed had been for nothing, making sure Maple Glen remained what Grandma had envisioned, a place where home meant more than money. That wasn't revenge, it was justice. And it was exactly what Grandma would have wanted. 6 months after the sentencing, I stood in the courthouse lobby again, but this time for a very different reason. The manila envelope in my hands contained the deed transfer papers. I was officially placing Maple Glen Apartments into a community land trust, ensuring it would remain affordable housing forever. Howard stood beside me, along with Ruth and a dozen residents who'd come to witness this moment. Even my parents were there, sitting quietly in the back, their presence a tentative step toward reconciliation. "You're sure about this?" Howard asked one last time. "You're essentially giving up millions in potential wealth." "I'm sure," I said, signing my name with Grandma's own fountain pen. "Wealth isn't just about money. Grandma taught me that." The news had broken that morning. Property manager gives away $12 million, building to ensure affordable housing, and reporters were already gathering outside. But this wasn't about headlines. It was about fulfilling a promise. As we emerged from the courthouse, the afternoon sun breaking through Portland's typical clouds, I saw a familiar figure across the street. Marcus Wolfe from Apex Development stood there, his phone pressed to his ear, no doubt calculating if there was still some angle to exploit. When he caught my eye, I simply smiled and shook my head. He turned and walked away, finally understanding that Maple Glen was never going to be his. Back at the building, we held a ceremony in the community room. The new trust board comprised of residents, community advocates, and housing experts officially took responsibility for Maple Glen's future. I would stay on as property manager, but now I worked for the community directly. Speech, speech, Mr. Petrov called out, and others joined in. I stood at the front of the room, looking at all these faces that had become family. 3 years ago, when Grandma was dying, she told me something I didn't understand at the time. She said, "Claire, buildings are just brick and mortar, but homes are made of trust. I trust you to know the difference." I paused, seeing nods of understanding around the room. Today, we've ensured that Maple Glen will always be homes, not just housing, that future residents will find the same welcome that Mr. Petrov found when he arrived from Russia, that the Rodriguez family found when they needed a place to start over, that every family here found when they needed it most. But this isn't just about preserving the past, it's about securing the future. The trust will maintain affordable rents while ensuring proper maintenance and improvements. No one will get rich off Maple Glen, but everyone will have a chance at a stable home. Mrs. Rodriguez wiped tears from her eyes. What would Edith say if she could see this? She'd probably say, "It's about time," Ruth interjected, making everyone laugh. And then she'd remind us all that the real work is just beginning. She was right. The trust structure meant constant vigilance, community involvement, and careful management. But it also meant security, no future. Sabrina could swoop in and destroy what we'd built. Later that evening, I found myself alone in my office, sorting through the day's mail. Among the usual bills and maintenance requests was a letter with familiar handwriting. My breath caught. It was from Sabrina. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. "Claire," it read, "I heard about the trust. You gave away $12 million. Even now, I can't understand why, but I've had 6 months to think in here, and maybe that's the point. Maybe I'll never understand because we see the world through completely different lenses. I still believe I was acting in the family's best interest. I still think you're a fool, but I'm beginning to realize that my definition of best interest might have been flawed. Mom writes me about the building, about the residents, about you. She seems different now, softer. She volunteers at the food bank and talks about Grandma constantly. I think losing everything finally taught her what actually mattered. I have 9.5 years left to think about that. I won't ask for forgiveness. We both know I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm starting to understand why Grandma chose you. Not because you were the better person, though clearly you were, but because you could see what I was blind to, that home means more than equity. Don't write back. I'm not ready for that. Maybe I never will be. S. I sat with the letter for a long time, then filed it away. Maybe someday Sabrina would truly understand what she'd tried to destroy. Maybe not. Either way, Maple Glen was safe. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. The Nguyen's youngest daughter, Lily, peeked in. "Miss Claire Mama wanted me to give you this." She handed me a card, handmade with construction paper and glitter. Inside, in careful children's handwriting, "Thank you for keeping our home safe. Love, Lily." This was wealth. I walked through the building that evening, checking locks and lights as always. In the community room, teenagers were doing homework together. In the courtyard, elderly residents shared tea and gossip. Through apartment windows, I saw families sharing dinner, lives unfolding in the security of stable homes. On the building's east wall, the ivy Grandma had loved still grew, now reaching the 3rd floor. I touched its leaves, remembering her words, "Strong roots, Claire. Everything good comes from strong roots." My phone buzzed a text from Howard. "Congratulations again. Edith would be over the moon. P.S. The Times wants to do a feature story. Interested." I thought about it, then typed back, "Only if they focus on the residents, not me." This was never about me. As I headed back to my apartment, I passed the plaque we'd installed that morning. Maple Glen Apartments, established 1976 by Edith Maddox, preserved in perpetuity for the community. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. 10 years from now, when Sabrina walks out of prison, this building will still be here, still affordable, still home to families who need it. The ivy will have grown higher, the residents will have changed, but the mission will remain. She asked what I'd accomplished, choosing community over cash. The answer was all around me in every maintained apartment, every child playing safely in the courtyard, every elderly resident aging in place with dignity. I'd accomplished exactly what Grandma had envisioned. I'd proven that greed didn't always win, that communities could fight back, that sometimes the little sister who everyone underestimated could change the game entirely. Sabrina had tried to raise my rent from $2 as $350 to $700. She'd smirked, as our parents called it, fair. She'd thought she held all the cards. But Grandma had taught me that in the end, the house doesn't always win. Sometimes the home does. And that's not just a victory, that's a legacy worth preserving. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please drop a comment and share your thoughts about Claire's journey and what home means to you. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. And if you really want to help more people discover this story, please hit that hype button. It makes a huge difference in helping others find these tales of justice and family. Until next time, remember, sometimes the greatest revenge is simply doing the right thing.